the announcement of the Chinese government. The official representative of Chinese Foreign Ministry, Mao Ning, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, she says the seizure of a Russian oil tanker in the Atlantic was a gross violation of international law by the United States. She always added the new sanctions that they're preparing to impose on Russia, and they're all illegal, and nobody, at least China, would not care about them. What are we heading? Where are we heading, in your opinion, when it comes to the latest news in Venezuela? The somehow kidnapping of the Venezuelan president and the aftermath, events. Somehow, this sort of new confrontation between the United States and on one side and Russia on the other side.
I I have to say, Nima, I don't know where we're going because I don't know what Trump is doing. There's a number of theories, and since the abduction of Nicolas Maduro, I listened to many hours of podcasts and read many articles to try to work it out. And I've paid especially attention to what the let's call it the pro-globalist opinion leaders are talking. So we're talking about people like uh, John Bolton and Rory Stewart, and Rory Stewart is a former UK MP and part of the whole foreign policy establishment since many years. Um, People who were close to Blair, uh, they don't know, right? They're guessing. They know one thing: they hate Trump, but they don't know what Trump is doing. So whatever it is that Trump is doing could be different than what everybody's talking about, So it's going to have something to do with oil, because oil is obviously going to be the great attractor that's going to incentivize a lot of people in powerful positions in the United States, because they want that oil, and that's I'm talking about powerful people on Wall Street. But then there's this whole deal with voter irregularities, with the Dominion voting system and Smartmatic machines, Smartmatic software, that somehow has something to do with Venezuela. Apparently, some of those servers were run from out of Venezuela, or some people say that it was the software was created in Venezuela, which I don't know if that's true. But there were other countries that were highlighted for their role in that, namely Serbia. So, already back in 2020, we heard about Venezuela and Serbia having some kind of a role in uh, election rigging, not just in the United States, but in general. But then, when the affair broke in the aftermath of the 2020 elections, then it turned out that it's a larger international network. And then when there were a great number of testimonials and witness statements and affidavits about these voting irregularities, then the Dominion Systems executive suddenly vanished. The U.S. executives, and they moved their offices, some of it to Canada over the border. And so they had a regional headquarters, I think, in Toronto. And one of the people who was involved was Lord Malloch Brown, who is a very close associate of George Soros. But, beyond there being a few Venezuelan people involved, and apparently some of them were government ministers, and one Venezuelan businessman who was apparently the controlling shareholder of the Smartmatic software company. They the trace of ownership gets lost in the network of offshore centers, uh, many of which are in Caribbean. Since the 1960s, the United Kingdom, Britain, created 14 offshore financial centers that are completely unregulated. There's no, they operate. They operate outside of the reach of international law for anybody who's attached to that concept, and they're completely untransparent, unregulated, in private hands, and so the trace gets lost there. How exactly Venezuela got enmeshed in all that, I don't know. But when a country is under very rigid sanction, it becomes very porous in the sense that like Syria was put under Caesar sanctions, and then nothing works in the country. People have no money. People have no future. And then I guess Western intelligence agencies can penetrate easily with and get a whole lot of things done with bribes. And so it may be that Nicolas Maduro knows a little something about this. And then there's also the drug running angle, which, we know that there's no drugs of any appreciable quantities coming into the United States from Venezuela, and no fentanyl is going to the United States from Venezuela. But the whole money laundering network that enables this drug trafficking, which also involves human trafficking, because some of these same cartels that run the drug networks have also facilitated the logistics and border crossings for millions of illegal aliens going into the United States. And we know that about 8 million Venezuelans left the country over the last 10, 20 years, and presumably many of those ended up in the United States. So again, I don't have the answer for why Trump wanted Maduro abducted, but let's say, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence to suggest that it may be related to the voting machines and election rigging business, and the trafficking in, what do you call it, drugs, humans, and weapons into the United States, and then laundering the money out of the United States. But there it seems that Canada is playing a major role. And I just yesterday published an article titled, "Is Venezuela's Fate a Warning to Canada?" Which may sound surprising, what does one have to do with the other? But I didn't invent that. That was actually the title of the Globe and Mail's editorial on Sunday. So, 5 days ago? The title was literally, "Is Venezuela's Fate a Warning to Canada?" And then you think, well, is it paranoid schizophrenia to think that abduction of Nicolas Maduro has something to do with Canada? And as it turns out, not so much. There is a real link, and Canada is up to their eyeballs in dirty business. Right on the border of the United States, there are multiple super labs in Canada from which things like fentanyl, methamphetamines, fake Xanax, all kinds of illegal drugs were being laundered, smuggled into the United States. The headquarters of this operation seems to be Toronto, but also British Columbia. And most of the money that was laundered back into from the United States, because all these sales are in cash, right? Most of that money was being laundered back into Canada. And there has been so I can't lay all this out because it's very extensive, but back in March, an online publication called The Bureau published a very extensive interview with one David Asher, right? David Asher is a former senior U.S. State Department official who has close ties to the Trump administration's financial and national security apparatus. And they've been trying very, very hard to break these drug smuggling networks in Canada. And they busted one super lab, which is like they said, this is the largest, most sophisticated fentanyl synthesizing lab that they ever busted. And it was in Canada, in British Columbia, close to the United States. And then the money from sales of this fentanyl was being laundered back into Canada, principally through the TD Bank. You know, a lot of people will have maybe brokerage accounts with the TD brokerage. That's the organization. And apparently, this is the largest money laundering operation in history of the United States. And in 2022, there was a certain thing called a Cullen Commission, Cullen, who published an extensive report about this. So 2022, right? So almost 4 years ago. Between then and now, the Canadian government has done nothing. Nobody went to jail. They didn't dismantle either the money laundering organization or the drug running networks. So this is why the Canadians are feeling very, very nervous about this, because the Trump administration is trying to put all of these organizations, so drug running, people smuggling, how do you call it, money laundering of the drug money, under an anti-terror legislation, because through normal legal proceedings under international law, the American investigators have been completely unable to trace these networks, because Canada has something in their legal system which supposedly to protect human rights and assure fairness. Every time the American investigators target a suspect, after 90 days, the Canadian authorities have to inform these people, oh, look, by the way, you're being targeted. And there's no way to mount a proper undercover sting operation in that much time. So every time they go after somebody, they find their suspect, people disappear because they find out that they're being targeted. So they move, they change their phone numbers, they change their security operation procedures. And so every time they slip out of the hands, and Canadians have been not only unwilling to assist the Americans with these investigations, it seems that they were positively protecting them. They've created like a crime permissive legal environment. Okay, so that's Canada. But then there's also we have to remember, in the Caribbean, there's 14 offshore banking centers that have also been, virtually all of them, involved in money laundering operations. And again, through the normal mechanisms of international law, they are untouchable because they actually have complete legal immunity. And so it seems to me that what Trump is doing is what Trump may be doing is attacking this operation, which is absolutely massive. There's between 50 and 75 trillion dollars in these offshore centers. Okay, it's absolutely colossal. And then there's another dimension to this, and I have to mention it because it could prove relevant. And that is that the Russians have had this system in their crosshairs for a long time. And I don't know if your viewers follow the Promethean Action Network, but they produce very good reports on YouTube and on X. And one of the women who is active there, Susan Kokinda, she pointed out that in 2014, one of the Russian one of well, no, the head of the Russian anti anti drug enforcement official. His name was Viktor Ivanov. Well, probably still is Viktor Ivanov. He gave a speech at a conference called Alternative Development for Drug Producing Regions. And so he said, this is the foundation of the Western financial systems. It it couldn't it couldn't survive without this massive drug running network. So Trump goes to war in the Caribbean. Marco Rubio said this is the war on drug trafficking networks and oligarchs. Um, and then, we have this seeming incident between the Russians and the Americans in the Caribbean Sea over an empty tanker. And now we have Russian naval vessels and a Belgorod class submarine also going to the Caribbean. Nima, I have no idea what the plan is, if there is a plan. Trump's actions seem so thuggish and gangster style, mafia style actions, that it's generated a lot of indignation and outrage from a lot of people. But I think we need to consider certain plausible explanations that are not being discussed, but that could be at the heart of what the Trump administration is doing. And so I think we'll know with time. I think we'll only know with time. Oil obviously has something to do with it. As I said, it's going to be a great attractor for the bankers and the oil companies. But like, if you're going into a dirty war, you're going to have to bring some allies along with you. And then the abduction of Nicolas Maduro. I have to say this: to me, the whole affair seems so incredibly strange and unlikely that I kind of suspect that it was arranged not between Darcy Rodriguez, the current president, and Nicolas Maduro's handpicked vice president, nor between anybody else. It may have been agreed with the government of Venezuela, led by Nicolas Maduro. That Nicolas Maduro simply wasn't given a choice. He had to turn himself in, and that he went voluntarily. And I know that there are reports about killed Cuban security people and some injured, but I think that this is all garnishing the story, because if you had no killed anybody on the ground in Venezuela, then that would put Darcy Rodriguez as a suspect number one for giving up Nicolas Maduro. If there was an actual gunfight and people died and then the Americans took him by force, well, then, she's in the clear. I don't think she gave him up. I really think that this was a deal between Maduro and Donald Trump. Because also, look at what happens. Maduro comes to the United States. Does he look like somebody who just got downgraded from president of Venezuela to a prisoner? He doesn't. He's smiling. He's hugging with the DEA officials. He's wishing them Happy New Year. He's showing thumbs up, victory signs. A friend of mine, Ian Burlingame, who was in the special forces and in military intelligence, he said no, 100% he went into witness protection program because he's got important evidence to share, important testimonials. He knows where the bodies are buried, and he probably wouldn't live long if he was left free as a president of Venezuela. We have to also look at things that didn't happen rather than things that did happen. Very often, when the Americans go to decapitate a nation's leadership, they kill. They killed Muammar Gaddafi. They didn't bring him to trial alive. They wanted to kill Bashar al-Assad if it wasn't for the Russians extricating him. We know that there was a kill order against President Viktor Yanukovych when the coup in 2014 happened. Again, the Russians extricated, and we know that they wanted to kill uh, uh, Erdogan in Turkey, and so on and so on. Here he was taken alive without a glitch, together with his wife. Okay, it doesn't look good, but it could be, plausibly part of the agreement where he said, like, okay, I'll go, but I want my wife to go with me as well. And it's like, okay. And then another thing that didn't happen is there was no regime change. So people will say, like, oh, yeah, 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 there was a regime change. No, there wasn't. Because other than Nicolas Maduro being removed, the Maduro regime remained in power completely. Nothing else changed. No legal changes, no government changes, and so forth. So the whole affair very clearly is inexplicable. And as I said, these globalist observers, uh, like John Bolton and a whole lot of these British analysts and commentators and public officials, they have no idea what happened. They really do not have an explanation. And I must have watched like 10 hours of podcast with various American and British globalist people. Anthony Scaramucci, uh, the guy who was Bill Clinton's campaign manager. I forget his name now. It escapes me. Many of them, and they're all at a loss. So anyway, it would be silly to pretend that I know what it's about. Since you're sitting in Iran, I'll say one thing that I think it's not about. I don't think it's about Iran, because a lot of people are saying, this is a long answer, I'll wrap up quickly. A lot of people are saying, oh, yeah, they went into Venezuela because they want to secure the oil before they attack Iran, because Iran is going to close the gates, the gates of Hormuz, and all this. That doesn't make any sense at all, because Venezuela's oil production is less than 1 million barrels a day. It's 20% of what it used to be at peak. To ramp up Venezuelan production to 3, 4, 5 million barrels a day, it would take at least 5 years and many, many billions of dollars of investment. Not only that, Venezuela has a potential insurgency of up to 3 million people, in addition to their regular military units. These people are Chavistas to the core. They're fired up, they're indignant. They will not just roll over. So you can't go into a country and start investing 10, $20 billion for oil extraction if you're constantly going to be under attack and under an insurgency. So you'd have to be stupid to think that you're just going to waltz into Venezuela and take their oil because you're anticipating closure of the gates of Hormuz. That doesn't make sense. I mean, it's unrealistic. So I don't think that the calculation is, okay, we're going to take Maduro and then we're going to attack Iran. Some people are also saying, like, well, there's all these C-17 cargo planes from the United States that are going to Europe and the United Kingdom, bringing all these troops, special troops and weapons. Yeah, okay, apparently that's true. But, Trump also wants to take Greenland. The UK is a bit closer to Greenland than it is to Iran. If they were going after Iran, then maybe they'd be bringing these troops and these weapons to Diego Garcia and to Qatar and so forth. But that's not. I don't. It seems too recklessly risky to do that. And I also suspect that the whole spat about Trump trying to kill Vladimir Putin is also it doesn't make sense to me. If for no other reason, is because if you ask yourself why would he do that? What would he possibly gain by assassinating Vladimir Putin? There's no answer to that question. That's just crazy. It would just be an evil act for the sake of being bad, because there's nothing to gain. It's not like if you take Vladimir Putin off of the scene, that Russia falls into your hands like a ripe piece of fruit. Russia is a very robust nation. There's Patrushev, there's Medvedev, there's all kinds of people there who would take Vladimir Putin's place. So to wrap up the whole thing, I would say that we don't know what's happening because nobody seems to know. But I suspect that in addition to Trump team, a very narrow Trump team knowing what they're doing, I think that the Russians and the Chinese also know what Trump is doing.